Good morning, everyone. It's a real pleasure for me to welcome you all to the Business Cup of Paris at this beautiful Hotel Potocki. World Climate Ltd and Sustainia are partnering for this event to ensure that 2015 will have a place in history as the year of solutions to address climate change. Solving climate change depends on partnerships across stakeholders in government, business, finance, and the civil society. And you are all represented here. We know you really well after many years, so please use the chance to network and make business with each other. Throughout this day, you'll have the chance to listen to panel discussions, interviews, and presentations from inspirational leaders and game changers, from business that are successfully scaling solutions such as Google, Iberdrola, Vestas, from cities that move quickly towards more sustainable infrastructure such as Dubai and Vancouver, from financial leaders that invest innovatively in green projects and initiatives such as the European Investment Bank and Pension Denmark. There'll also be a number of thematic interactive workshops that will address the role and potential of non-state actors in driving sustainable growth and development. I can mention Carbon Tracker, Carbon Trust, the winter sports industry, the bioeconomy. But allow me first to introduce my good friend, Erik Rasmussen, founder of Sustainia and CEO of Monday Morning Global Institute, our co-organizing partner of this day. He will invite you to the part of the event that completes the full picture on how far we are in addressing climate change now and why we right now are witnessing an industrial revolution. Please go ahead, Erik.
Yes, later on today I'll be inviting you to the world of sustainable solutions so you can see for yourself what kind of revolution we are facing. You will meet outstanding entrepreneurs, outstanding innovators who have documented how we can build the world of tomorrow by the solutions of today. We have been searching for them. We have been identifying the best in the world during the last 4 years. This afternoon, we will honor the 10 best from 2015. Your guide to this journey will be people who themselves have been involved in sustainability for a number of years. You will meet the young filmmaker and film producer who has devoted part of his life to make a better world. You will meet Richard Branson, Ted Turner. You will meet the time warrior, Connie Hedegaard, and the new executive director of UN Global Compact, Lisa Kingwood. They together will take you to this wonderful world of sustainable solutions. So don't miss it. We embark 4:30 precisely from this event. So I'll see you later, and I'll come back with further information. It'll be a wonderful journey. Thank you.
I would now like to invite my close colleague, Andreas Schneider, Chairman of World Climate Ltd, to the stage to master the opening ceremony. Please welcome Andre.
Thank you very much, Jens. Ladies and gentlemen, we will now start with the opening plenary, the 2030 Solution Agenda, Vision, Innovation and Action. As I have to announce now, we're in the middle of the COP21 process. The COP process, as its name says, is a process, and I have unfortunately to excuse the Minister of Morocco, who is actually still in discussions ongoing ahead, and I think we're all with her because it's very important that we will, over the next days, get to a final conclusion. But as I said, this is a process, and the process has started already last year in Lima in Peru, where important stones have been laid to what is done today. And so I'm extremely pleased to invite His Excellency Minister Manuel Pulgar Vidal, Minister of Environment from Peru, to actually share with us his views of where we are, where we have come from, and where he believes we will go. Minister, please join me here.
Good morning. Thank you to give me this opportunity to share with you some reflections about this time. We must, we will, we can. It is exactly the phrase that the Action Day has raised yesterday, and also the phrase that framed all the different sessions that we have already had and that we will continue having this week about forest, resilience, ocean, water, building, cities, energy, among some others. And today here in the World Climate Summit, we are talking about the 2030 Agenda, vision, innovation, and action. So what is happening now? In what time we are? What are the future that we expect to have? Let me say that we are in a key time, in a key year, in which the world, the planet, the leaders of around the world has already taken some key decisions. The Addis Ababa Agenda for finance for development, the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, 17 very clear objectives, 169 goals, and by the end of this week, a climate agreement. So in some way, we are framing the new paradigm of development. That is part of the building of the new vision for the next 15 years, for the next 35 years, for the vision by the end of this century. But in this framework, business sector has already begun to move action, to mobilize action. And also it is in a time in which it is raising action. And in this process, fortunately, in this formal process, the process has already recognized the importance to have the business sector on the same table. Probably you can remember that before of the COP20, the business sector had been used to be outside the walls discussing and not in the table. But with the Lima Paris Action Agenda, we have already gained this room for the business sector to be on the table talking with the leaders and by having a state and non-state actors. And yesterday, President Hollande and Secretary General Ban Ki-moon has raised this point, saying that we can maintain this room from here to the future. Also, Secretary General Ban Ki-moon has announced the new climate summit in May the 5th and the 6th in Washington, D.C. of 2016. So that is why you should use this room for debate, to create dialogue, to trying to raise ambition as a way to create engagement between these different actors. Because we are in a time in which to fulfill our objective, to don't go over the 2 degrees Celsius, or to have action, clear action, to raise the ambition, to fulfill with the qualitative objective of decarbonized economy and resilient economy, we do need to have you all in the same room, in the same table. And let me make a brief comment of exactly where we are with the agreement. Yesterday, the ADP, the ad hoc working group of the Durban platform, that it is the mandate that we had received in 2011 in Durban, South Africa, has already finished his job and has given to the new president of COP21, Minister Fabius, a draft text. So in this week, what we will have, it is negotiation in a high-level ministerial segment. So ministers are going to be engaged in a very difficult and complex dialogue. Still, there are many things to solve. In relation to ambition, the discussion of 1.5 or 2 degrees, the quantitative or qualitative objective, in transparency and equity, the differentiation among all the texts, and also the transparency. In pre-2020 ambition, the fulfillment of the obligation of developed countries that they had already put on the table. And in finance, not only the fulfillment of the 100 billion for 2020, but also a clear trajectory to fulfill with that. But I am completely sure that we will deal with our objective, that we will reach that objective to have an agreement. And by that, in the beginning of the next year, we should work in the implementation. And the implementation of all this framework, but also in the implementation through action. So that is why I consider this meeting a very important meeting. So let's help us to make also Morocco, COP22, very active in trying to raise all what you are doing, all the action that you have already taken in your hand, because it is the only way to assure a better world for the future, to assure that we are dealing with the consequences of climate change, and as a way to give to the next generation better quality of life. So let me give to you all my warm welcome to this meeting, and also I hope that you can have very fruitful, constructive, and useful discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. As we heard, it will be important that all forces will get together to actually help support the solution which has to come out of next week. So we need to accelerate and deepen our response to climate change. And as we have also heard, we will need also to look forward, because things will not stop after the COP21. They will actually only start, and then the work will have to start. So I can also tell you that we will be pleased to have actually the Minister of Environment of Morocco with us at the closing plenary. So we will be able to hopefully have an outlook with her on where we go. And also we will certainly with World Climate be present during the Morocco summit to maintain the place and the platform for business to continue to be contributing to that. So as we said, we need top-down commitment, and we hope that next week this will happen with agreements and actions. But we also need, and that's very important, bottom-up engagement, support and solutions, and also collaboration with business, because business can contribute very importantly to solve those issues. Hence, it is important that during this COP21, the governments, business and civil society set the right signals and directions. So now I'm pleased to set off this discussion, which is all about setting the signals and directions and proposing solutions. I'm very pleased to invite Ivo de Boer on the stage to moderate the panel Business Leadership for the Successful Implementation of a Universal Agreement. Ivo de Boer is the Director General of Global Green Growth Institute, and he will moderate a panel of distinguished set of CEOs with His Excellency Said Al-Tayyer, Managing Director and CEO of Dubai Electricity and Water Authority, Anders Runewald, CEO of Vestas, John Bryant, CEO and President of Keller Company, Huang Min, CEO of Hemin Solar, and finally John Woolard, Vice President of Google. So please come and join me here on the scene to set off this meeting. Thank you very much.
Very good, thank you. Good morning. All right. Sunday morning, Paris. I think you could argue, and I would argue, that countries have been negotiating climate action for 25 years. They started probably a couple of years in the run-up to the Rio Environment Conference in 1992, talking about launching a framework convention on climate change, which they did in 1992. And since then, we've had the first, the second, the third, the fourth, many meetings of the Conference of Parties to the Framework Convention on Climate Change. And here we are at COP21. I think in a number of countries of the world, you can get a driving license when you're 16, In some countries, you're allowed to go to a bar when you're 18, but in all countries, you grow up when you're 21. So the question is the climate process going to grow up on its 21st birthday? So what do we have? We have a number of very positive things. Last Monday, at the beginning of this conference, there was a near universal presence of leaders from around the world, indicating that they want something to come out of Paris. I think we're at the point where 185 countries have submitted national action plans. They have a much more complicated name in the process, have submitted national action plans to begin to implement climate action, both mitigation and adaptation. So universal political commitment, universal commitment to action. But if you look at what that action adds up to, it's not going to take us to 2 degrees. It's not even going to reduce global emissions. It's going to slow the pace of the increase of emissions. So what I want to discuss with you as panelists today, and I hope the people in the room a bit later as well, is how is Paris, how is that agreement changing things for you? And is what is happening outside the Paris Agreement changing? Or maybe to ask a more fundamental question, is the Paris Agreement actually driving change? Or is the Paris process, the climate process, part of something larger that is changing your business model, your business case, the story, the world that you're operating in? So I would like to talk about that a little bit for the next hour, if you will allow me. And I'm going to start with you, John, if I may. I was looking through your CV, and I apologize for not introducing all the speakers because you've been able to read their bios. But I saw in your bio that one of the jobs that you've had in the past is as Chief Financial Officer. And I would like you to tell us a little bit about how climate, how broader sustainability issues are changing the perspective of a Chief Financial Officer or not changing the perspectives of a Chief Financial Officer.
Well, it's a great question. And I think in the world that we live in today, there's 2 very clear ways that sustainability and climate change are critical to the success of our company, even if you took purely a financial perspective of our business. One is that consumers care. And you're seeing consumers increasingly want to understand where their food comes from, what's been done to grow it, how it's been produced, who's done what to the food, and that visibility and transparency into the supply chain, and consumers wanting to know, are we following sustainable practices, not just within the 4 walls of our plants, but from the farm all the way to the breakfast table. And we're seeing a generational shift. So baby boomers have always had a concern, but the millennials are even more passionate about their food and where we're going. So markets like the US, we're seeing increasing concerns from consumers in the areas of sustainability. As a consumer-driven company, that's critical for us to ensure that we are enabling our consumers to see that we are, in fact, providing an environment where we can sustainably serve the population as we go forward. The second part is a very fundamental business requirement. We purchase grains around the world. We have to ensure that supply chain is stable and able to meet the needs of the future. As you all know, we're seeing increasing population, potentially a 70% increase in food production by 2050. We don't have all of the line of sight to be able to make that a reality. One of the concerns we have with climate change is increasing volatility in the grain system, producing risks to our ability not just to get grains at a reasonable price, but to get them at all. We've already seen in the last several years shocks in the system where governments have closed their borders to the transfer of product to protect rice in their local market, and that has locked out other markets from having access to rice at that time. So both from a consumer perspective and from a supply perspective, it's absolutely essential to the long-term success of a company like the Kellogg Company to work on this. And that's why we're committed to working beyond just our four walls, but take on responsibility for our entire end-to-end supply chain, working with our partners all the way through that to improve the quality and the sustainability of that supply chain.
Going back to your previous job as a chief financial officer, how do you look at risk fundamentally in a different way today than you did 10 years ago?
So we do an environmental risk process as a company. We do that through the businesses, and we do that with our board of directors. On that environmental risk map is the access to grains, considerations of sustainability, those sorts of items. So yes, I think today versus say 10 years ago, there's a much greater recognition of the critical nature of sustainability and working in this area than what there was in the past.
You talked a little bit about security of supply. How are questions around security of supply changing your relationships with suppliers? And are you changing your relationship with suppliers to take climate issues into account?
Absolutely. So we are working back again through that supply chain. So we work both directly with suppliers like Bunge, but also back with the farmers themselves. So we've committed to work with 500,000 farmers to implement climate-smart agricultural practices in the system. That will both improve the livelihoods of a lot of particularly smallhold farmers to ensure that the supply chain is stable. It has to also be economically sustainable for the farmers themselves. And it means we should be able to improve the yield and reduce the impact of those crops on the environment. And there's a series of things that we're doing. For example, quinoa growers in Bolivia. We've worked with quinoa growers in Bolivia to both improve the yields from quinoa, to reduce the environmental impact, to improve the soil health for the production of quinoa, but also to provide them with solar panels so they have access to electricity, so they have access to prices to ensure that they're selling the product at the right price, and so their kids have access to light so they can study it in the evening, et cetera, and improve their lives in the future. So it's a full element of sustainability.
Okay, thank you. I'll come back to you in a bit. Your Excellency, Mrs. Saeed Al-Tayeb, we all in the room know Dubai as a place of fossil fuels. But we also increasingly know Dubai, the Emirates, as a place of innovation, as a part of the world that is changing direction, a part of the world that is finding solutions in new directions. Can you tell us a little bit about how important this climate process is to you and how it's changing the agenda of your country, the kinds of things that you're working on at the moment?
I think, thank you, Versul. It starts with the leadership and it starts with the strategy. Recently, His Highness announced new strategy, and I think this is the first strategy in the Middle East, which is 75% of clean energy by 2050. And this is the first thing. Second thing is about the security of supply. You mentioned diversification of fuel mix. This is important in order to ensure that we should provide a reliable supply. Also increasing the efficiency of not only at the supply side, but also at the demand side. Reduction of 30% by 2030 of the demand. Second thing, we have a very clear strategy regarding carbon abatement to reduce 16% by 2020. Also, we are, I think, the only country in the Middle East where we announced to retrofit 100,000 buildings, and we just started to retrofit them and to convert these buildings to a green building. So this is, we're talking about to be a role model in energy efficiency, to improve the diversification and to have a security of supply. And these are the main direction to even that to adopt to the renewable.
You talked about demand-side management.
Yes.
Do you find that awareness of people, citizens in Dubai, is changing around these issues?
Definitely. I mean, there is, of course, I think the consumption, we measure it by per capita consumption, of course, individually. And we see that there is a reduction, whether in water consumption or per kilowatt consumption. We have to do a lot of program, for example, especially the awareness through the TV, awareness through the radio. We have to also have program award through the, for example, school awards, Emirates award for the business people, for the commercial, for the residential. We notice that, and we measure this, especially for the student, saving billion of gallon, and also saving kilowatt hours per year. People want to understand, and we have to educate the citizen, we have to educate the student. And I think student also, they should have it part of their syllabus in order to understand that these are very valuable resources. We have to protect the environment, and we have to reduce the footprint.
Do you, if I look at Dubai now as a city for a moment, consider it as a city, do you have the feeling that to have good policies on energy, to have good policies on water, to be a city of innovation, does that make a difference from the perspective of an investor climate? Is it that making you more attractive as a place to go?
Definitely, you see, first of all, when we mention security of supply, now the investor, he would like to have a reliable supply of power. This is one thing. Second thing is that we are working toward the efficiency. If we improve the efficiency, I give you an example, two examples actually. We reduced for the last 20 years the line loss in Dubai from 7% to 3.2%. And this is the lowest losses worldwide. This means that I will defer my investment. I will not have new power plant. Then I will have big reduction in CO2. This is another issue. The second issue, customer minute loss. It's international terminology about the reliability. We in Dubai, 5 years ago actually, we were about 16 minutes per customer. Today, it's about 4.5 minutes per customer. And I think by the end of the year, it will be better. What the figure that I had now, it's 2014. But 2015 will be much better because, you see, Dubai becoming a smart city. And His Highness announced that by 2017, Dubai will be the smartest city because we are implementing new technology, smart grid, real-time restoration of supply. This, of course, will help in climate change, reduce the CO2. I'll give you an example. We have the smartphone. We have more than 150 in Dubai electricity and services. Just through the phone, you shouldn't go and pay your bill. Through the phone, you can pay your bill, you can lodge your claim. If you are a contractor, you can get your drawing approved by Dubai municipality, obtain your NOC. Now, the government, I think, recently they done a restructure, and they want to have all the government at one platform where they can provide real-time services to the customer. I mean, they don't want, you see, by doing so, you don't want a customer to visit all government authority. Therefore, you will save in time, you will save in effort, you will reduce your emission, CO2, especially the vehicle, the traffic. And this is part also of abatement strategy that we had. We put a strategy where we can reduce 16% with all government departments. This means that the traffic department and the Dubai municipality, the aluminum smelter, or other industry, the power station, how to improve efficiency at the supply side. For example, during the financial crisis, there is a growth in Dubai. Still, even financial crisis, but the growth was during 2006 and 7 and 8, from 6% to 7%. However, we were able to produce about 450 megawatt without any fuel. It means that with the existing capacity, we are trying to upgrade the system, the power station, by having 3 types of technology: fogging system, evaporative cooling, and thermal storage. Okay. By doing this, we reduce our footprint, CO2, huge actually reduction. We defer the investment, we reduce our capital cost, we reduce also our operating cost.
Fantastic. Wang Ming.
Hi.
Good morning.
Morning.
You started off in the petroleum business.
Yeah.
And you used your salary, I read in your bio, you used your salary to completely change the direction of your career.
Yeah.
And now you are in
also
solar.
the direction of China.
Also the direction of China. In fact, that is something I wanted to... that is something I wanted to actually ask you about. What is driving this change in the Chinese direction? What is motivating this massive change that we're seeing today?
After the birth of my daughter, I decided to change totally my career, whole direction of my life. Finally, I travel, my people traveled all around China, cities by cities, countries by countries, village by villages. So in these 20 years, we all about half of our population use the solar hot waters, and a lot of them use solar PV on their roof, mostly solar hot water. So that's a big contribution, big change. Think about 0.7 billion, 7,000, let me see, 70 million people use the solar. Most of them are countrymen. So that's big contribution. But, you know, only 1%, less than 1% energy substitution happened in China. Even so many people use solar. So I think I enlarged my category of business, not only solar thermal, not only solar PV for daily life or for large power station, but also solar charging, solar toys, solar bag, solar hat, solar everything, solar cooker, yeah, solar everything. Let me do some advertisement. Solar charger, solar bag, solar everything. Yeah, you know, when we talk about climate change, we narrowed our understanding of world changing. Climate change, most of the people think carbon emission or the temperature change. But climate change mainly focuses on the environment change. For example, most developing countries, we have water contamination, all black lake, black river, black pond, black dirty water. Every developing country is not Dubai, not Dubai. But so I think we should enlarge this category. I hope this Paris conference, I have experienced many conferences, Copenhagen, Cancun, and so on, Dubai, and so on. But this time we should enlarge that into water emission, water emission, air emission, and garbage emission. So micro emission, that's the direction. So we not only change China's direction, we must change the world direction. Only climate change, only temperature change is not enough. So that's the wrong direction first. Second, all people focus on supplying sectors, power station, PV. So not all people concerned about daily life. So we must shift from the supplying sector into end user, utility sectors. Why I developed so many solar heating, solar cooling, solar desalinating, solar that, solar this, solar house, passive house, solar car, solar tracking, solar everything. So if everybody think about just like everybody want to buy a mobile phone, smart mobile phone, everybody want to have a house, everybody want a car. So we must learn from IT industry, we must learn from car industry to make our solar or green life popularized. So that's my point.
I live in Seoul, in the Republic of Korea.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
So China is just around the corner from me. It takes me about an hour and a half to get to Beijing.
Yeah. Welcome to my solar valley.
I look forward to coming. But it strikes me nowadays, certainly in the eastern part of China, you can't breathe the air, you can't drink the water, and the soil is so polluted that it is even difficult to use for agriculture. So the question I would have for you, it's a bit of a complicated question, but what is happening in China today? Is that fundamentally changing China's position in the negotiations? Or is it the negotiations that are driving a change of attitude in China?
All people see China as a heavily polluted country, as a big consumption country, fast developed with the expense of energy resources and the environment. That's right. But not many people see that China is now the biggest solar producer, solar market, and energy saving market. And China has a very strong, strong government, Everybody says something not good. But in my mind, 30 years ago, another reason to push me to solar business is my wedding. After my wedding ceremony, I took my wife to my country, my home, in the Taihu Lake, near the Taihu Lake, near Shanghai. A big pollution, dirty water, stinky Taihu Lake, pond, river, everything contaminated, black, just like India and Dhaka, just right now. So I decided to change that, but not myself. So after 10 years, the water become clear and by and by. So now the water situation is much, much better right now. In the 10 years. Now I strongly believe
Can can I ask you another question? I think 10 years ago, you were talking about 10 years ago. 10 years ago, many developing countries had the feeling that aggressive action on climate change would be bad for business. Do you think today that aggressive global action on climate change would be good or bad for business in China?
Of course, good. But we must strengthen this power, not only focus on temperature change, carbon emission. We must focus on water, good water emission, garbage emission, other dirty air emission, and a lot of other things. In developing countries, we should step by step to stop this by good business, by learning from IT.
So
make everybody living green.
Is global climate policy helping to take the Chinese economy in a different direction?
Of course, but not all, because the climate policy would only focus on so-called temperature change or carbon emission. So that's the eye of Western world. Our developing countries, we should see the dirty pond, see the air, garbage, all of these things. Because of some kind of election, democracy. I just from Brazil.
Okay, I'm sorry, I have to stop you there, because I want to turn to John, and I want to ask you, is what is happening here changing your business model? Is it changing the world for you?
We're hopeful about what's happening here, but we started a decade ago focusing on what we could do as a business. And so I think if the business world waited for all these agreements, we would have been waiting since 1992. And so a lot of businesses like us decided to do what we could along the way to move forward in advance of or before there was any type of global agreement. So I'd say what's happening here is fundamental for the future and to move forward. It is, to touch on your earlier question, good for business because business needs clarity and certainty to move forward. So the ambiguity that exists when there is no agreement is worse than probably anything. We're big fans of getting an agreement in place. We want something that's clear, that's long-term. Ideally, over time, you need to bring that externality and some of that pricing into the system, but business then can execute in multiple ways. But it doesn't change necessarily what we've been doing things very aggressively before this because we thought it was the right thing to do for a while. Google sat back probably 10 years ago and said, decarbonization is almost inevitable. How we get there is debatable. Is it going to be through? So we said, let's start the move to decarbonize methodically, and let's do what we can. So we've bought a lot of power. We bought 2 gigawatts of zero carbon power for our data centers around the world. We've invested $2.5 billion into various renewable facilities around the world. We did one with our friends here at Vestas in Africa. It's the largest wind farm in sub-Saharan Africa. And so we're trying to do what we can to push forward. But we absolutely think that we need clear policy to come out of this very soon, because you can only push forward so far in the absence of a clear roadmap and clear guidelines. So what we're hoping for is clarity and long-term, and something that's got long-term commitments that are unequivocal and unambiguous.
But do you need that signal to come from here? I mean, not that long ago, I had the great pleasure to speak at an energy conference in Houston, Texas. And I had to speak immediately after Dick Cheney. And I thought, what am I going to say here? So I said that I had a message from the chair of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, that he had been reading all his charts upside down, and that actually global temperature was decreasing and we had nothing to worry about. and everybody in the room laughed. But then I asked them the question, if climate change was not an issue, would that fundamentally change things for you? Because you have energy prices, energy security, food, water, biodiversity loss, desertification, global trends driven by urbanization, wealth increase, and aging. So how important is this climate signal actually for you? And is it the only signal you're watching? And do you think you're going to get it here?
Oh, it's clearly not the only signal that we're watching at all. I mean, we look across, in the US, we did attack clean air and clean water early, but that fight's not over, right? You can constantly improve your standards and drive forward, and we would continue to do that. Those are generally local issues contained within a country, but sometimes you get intercompany issues, inter-country issues on that. So whether it's environmental health, safety, I think all these categories need to get addressed. What's unique about climate is that it's the one that cuts across time and space in a way that's much different, and so requires the entire world to come together in a way that's very unique. And so I don't think that just climate is viewed in a vacuum or by itself. It's all interrelated. But this particularly bringing that externality, bringing something in that says we need to attack this across borders and across time and across space in a way that's more methodical will help everybody. People are making progress without the treaty, but it's not enough. We all know it's not enough.
But if you listen to His Excellency Saeed Al Tayeb talking about how Dubai is changing, how it's focusing on, how it's diversifying, how it's focusing on efficiency, how it's focusing on increasing consumer awareness. When he says that, do you hear things that are relevant to how you see your business model change over time?
Well, we see the world getting much more interactive over time. It has been for the last several decades. It'll continue. That pace will even accelerate. So interaction, the Internet of Things, the ability for devices to communicate. We sell now a thermostat that people buy because it's a great thermostat. It's called Nest. But what the benefits of it are that now you can actually, the default position is not on but off. And so the energy efficiency and energy savings that you get, you have to turn it back on to warm yourself up. And so you start to get a shift in how you manage your own energy and how you manage things. And we see interconnectivity being critical, and that's part of our core business. The ability to have the grid itself become more dynamic and more responsive, like they mentioned in Dubai, is absolutely critical when you look at things like renewable energy. Renewable, if you look at solar and wind, we buy a lot of it. It's great energy, but from a power quality perspective, it's still intermittent. And to deal with that intermittency, the grid itself is going to need to become more interactive, more networked, and more resilient. And that's one of the critical, we can't just do any one thing as we look at solving energy and climate. We've got to there's a basket of goods out there that needs to be attacked fairly systematically, because if you just build a lot of wind, I know you'd like to build a lot of wind, we'd like to buy a lot of wind, but you need to make sure that the grid is resilient, and the more connected it is, the more you spread that over diverse populations, and thus the more you can build in and bring into it.
Okay. Anders,
Yeah.
you love climate policy, don't you? But before you answer that question, as I said right at the beginning, so we have 185 countries that have committed to action on climate change. You're going to tell me anyway what you want to tell me, but I want to ask you a question nonetheless. How important is the environment in which you operate? How important is the attitude of the country in which you work to you being able to take a business model in a different direction? Does government policy matter?
Of course it does. I mean, so we are in the energy generation business, and of course that's a very big contributor to the CO2 problem. And energy generation is a regulated business. It has been so for the last centuries, and it's also a business that relies on long-term investments.
So being a regulated industry, being dependent on long-term investments, of course we are dependent on a long-term policy framework, because that regulates a big part of the big electricity generation industry. So no doubt about that. But having said that, also echo a little bit what we heard before, there is a lot of things happening outside the political framework and a lot of positive things happening outside. The cost of financing is dependent on the framework, but we also see now actually a lot of corporations coming in to the renewable space and of course in our case the wind, and companies like Google that invest for their own operation, but also actually sometimes just because it's a sound investment case. And of course that's very promising, and that of course sends a signal also to everyone that generates electricity. So extremely positive and important part from the political framework that corporations are active and get into renewable. Another thing, we touched on that in the beginning, is the consumer.
Is the?
Consumer.
Yeah.
So all studies I've seen is that actually the end consumer to something around 70 to 80% prefers to buy renewable energy. And in the end of the day, the consumer's voice will trickle through the different regulated systems that we have today. So regulation, it's a regulated market, so it's important. It's long-term policy, very important for viability of long-term investment and actually also getting the cost of financing down. But a lot of other things also extremely important and very positive. Last but not least, of course, what we can do is to drive down the cost of wind. So wind is already clean, wind is already water-free, and wind is already in several markets the lowest cost energy. So the more successful we are of driving down the levelized cost of energy for wind, and so far the industry has taken down the cost about 80% in the last 20 years, the less reason there actually are to not choose then a clean alternative.
I don't know if you've had a chance to have a look at all of the action plans that countries are submitting, countries have submitted in the run-up to Paris. But do they give you a sense of change, that things are fundamentally beginning to change, that countries are moving in a different direction?
I think that, of course, I've looked at the broad base of it, but if I take some example, of course, in the EU, we have a 27% target on renewable to 2030. That is, of course, important. Remains to be seen how it will be implemented and how it will be followed up, so to speak. I think the overarching agreements between China and the US, it's, of course, extremely positive. The Clean Power Plan, if it will be passed, also a positive vision and way to go. But of course, a lot of work remains for this to be firm plans and actually plans that are followed up and we know how they will be implemented. But if I look outside that in markets like, for example, Brazil, where we've seen that it's a new build market, need more energy, and an open auction system, any technology is allowed, and wind has taken between 70 and 80% of all the new build capacity. Chile, another good example where renewables actually took 100% in the latest auction for new build. I think wind around 70 and solar around 30. So looking at new build markets where we don't have a current regulated system, where you add without many policies decision. South Africa, another good example where we see very good build out on pure competitive grounds without a strong renewable policy in place.
But Brazil, Chile, relatively easy markets to invest in. John was talking about predictability, about clear signals. If we don't talk about Brazil or about Chile, but if we talk about Mali or Myanmar or Laos, what needs to happen there for you to get interested, for you to see an opportunity in those kinds of markets?
No, I think it's very similar, of course. There has to be an overall framework of investment in electricity for the country. So technology independent, but an overall investment plan for electricity generation for sure. And there is a lot of business development going into those kinds of markets. The other part is then, of course, financing. That plays an important part. And how can financing be brought to those kind of projects? And again, I shouldn't speak on behalf of the financial institutions, but again, it's about the policy certainty that attract financing to a reasonable cost. So I think it's not just that they are, my other examples, that they are easy. I think the policy has been there to say this is the price you will get, this is the time you will get this price, and then it actually attracts the financing part as well.
In Denmark, you've got something called the Danish Climate Fund, which is a partnership between the government, which is taking first risk on investment, technology providers like yourselves, and pension funds, which are looking for a good place to put money at a time when interest rates are nowhere. Do those kinds of models help on the finance and the risk issue?
Definitely. No, definitely are very important because, of course, you need to have sometimes the international institution taking some risk in a new country. I mean, pension funds, we definitely see a big interest, not just in the more traditional markets for pension funds, infrastructure funds, but also then, as was mentioned, companies like Google who actually do part of the financing in the biggest project in Africa, in Kenya, that we supply turbines to, and took a small part in the beginning and had a close cooperation at the start of the project. So I think that's a very good example on a combined finance package that you can also bring to more developing countries.
Okay.
Can I make one comment?
Sure.
When you mentioned the developing world, I think Anders is correct that in a lot of places you have to have robust institutions, clarity of where you honor contracts and where we can all invest, and that's key for large projects. But there's a movement happening that's real with distributed projects that we're looking a lot at how to finance and how to move forward. And you take, now for 50 watts, you can take a solar panel, add a very small amount of lithium-ion storage, and then add LED lighting, which is incredibly efficient. And you change lives, and your competition is kerosene, or something worse. So, and there are hundreds of companies in Africa that are now moving forward with this type. It's not going to be grid quality, lights are always on, but it does transform lives, and it's one of the biggest trends that we see. Now, so there's going to be a lot of effort in how to package that up, how to finance that, how to make that move forward. But it's very different from the big projects, and I think it's a trend that is important for development, and it's happening at a very robust rate. So it's one of these things that you need to watch, and pretty soon it's going to catch you. You don't want it to sneak up on you.
But is that seriously going to reduce policy risk? Is that seriously going to alter the relevance of a stable policy environment?
No, I think what's beautiful about it is it's just one of those things that moves in the absence of policy risk. It just moves forward because the market alternative is so bad. And the technology has actually moved to the place where it can compete. And you can pay for it with your mobile phone. 40%, I believe, of mobile payments in Kenya, or of payments go through mobile phones. And so now you've got an ecosystem where that can work in the absence of anything happening here.
Okay, that's very interesting. We've been doing lots of talking up here, and you've been doing lots of listening. I would like to see if there's anyone in the room that has got a question or a comment for one of the people on the panel, and there are two requirements. One is that, well, of course you have to ask the question, but you have to say who you are, and please say who the question is directed to. And I see that you're very keen to say something over there. Do we have microphones? Okay, so the question, don't seem to have a microphone yet, but if I summarize the question, it's how can we continue to push innovation in the absence of strong government policy signals? You didn't meet the requirement of saying who the question is directed to. Oh, that's easy. Anyone on the panel. John, let's start with you. What's your reaction to this?
Sure, I think we need entrepreneurs to keep pushing forward aggressively. And when I first started, I started a software company for energy efficiency in '97, and it was there wasn't a big driver or a policy, and I was dumb enough to do it anyway. And I think people have to just take these challenges on and keep pushing forward. And yet at the end, we had 2 gigawatts. We created some of the first markets in demand response, and we broke through some barriers. So I think if people wait for policy to be perfect, you'll never start. So I think entrepreneurs and technologists need to just be moving forward, be pushing forward, and drive those changes while you're building, because that's the way it happens. It's not don't wait. Just, I think, getting forward, being aggressive, and just because somebody says it's been done before and didn't work, don't necessarily believe that.
Mr. Altea, what would be your encouragement to entrepreneurs who want to change?
No, I think we have to look at it from holistic point of view, at the supply side and the demand side. Any organization, I think, they have to do a lot of work toward, especially the supply side, whether they are optimizing the cost, whether they are reducing the emission. I give you an example. In Dubai, we are producing nearly about 250 million gallons of water just from the waste heat, without having additional fuel or additional gas. So we shouldn't just rely on the renewal, but also I think we should look at the efficiency as a holistic. Second thing, I think we should have a strategy where you can have your KPIs, you measure KPIs, and then you, at the end, you see you're achieving. For example, in Dubai, we put 30% reduction, and this means that each year we have to measure per capita the consumption of the individual. So I think this is very important, that we shouldn't think about the climate change as only renewable or clean energy. No, I think there is a lot of work we have to do at the supply side.
Okay, Huang Ming?
Yeah, I strongly oppose everybody talking about policies when we talk about climate change or renewable energy. And I also strongly opposed when talking about poor country, poor area, we focus on the poor area. You know, everybody want to have a phone, mobile phone, Google, everything in the poor country, but they need an example like Silicon Valley. In rich country, at least the country like China. So we have set up a big example, Solar City, Dezhou near Beijing, and Solar Valley in Dezhou, my city. If you visit my city, without any policy, in these 20 years, we have covered all the roof, near all the roof with solar thermal, solar PV. We installed 200 kilometers solar lamp street without policy. That's industry. We need example. We have used these 20 years to achieve such miracle. So I strongly believe next 10 years, we will make everything solar, everyday life solar, or energy efficiency buildings, cars, transportation, infrastructure, industry. Commercialization is the power. So we must do that. So set a good example for the whole world to learn, to copy. Just USA has set up a very big example for IT industry. We will set another example for the whole world to copy. Solar, renewable energy, and green life.
John, I saw in your CV that you're also part of the Consumer Goods Forum. And the Consumer Goods Forum is a group of consumer goods companies, who I think, and it goes to your point, Huang Ming, who I think in the absence of very clear government policy signals around issues like sustainable beef, soy, palm oil, are trying to change the agenda in the absence of policy by changing their business practices. Is that working?
It is. I mean, the Consumer Goods Forum is both larger food companies, household consumer good companies, and major retailers. We've taken on a number of areas such as deforestation, as well as refrigerants used by retailers to reduce their impact on the environment. So I think we're making progress there. I think there's even more that we can do. As individual companies, we have extensive programs beyond just what we're doing at that forum level.
All right, so there are a number of companies that are part of the Consumer Goods Forum, maybe accounting for 20% of global market on some of these things?
Well, you're talking about all of the top 50 retailers and manufacturers of food. So it would be, of a packaged food percentage, it would be dramatic, a very large percentage.
But the suppliers that you're trying to influence, when you influence them, do you find that they also change their practices vis-a-vis markets that are not part of the Consumer Goods Forum, that are not trying to move in that direction, or do they have double standards for different markets?
So we operate in a global supply chain. So as a Kellogg company, we operate in 160 markets around the world. And we're sourcing our raw materials from a wide variety of different countries. So obviously we work within each policy environment in each country, but we're trying to drive a consistent approach across all of those markets. And so whether you look at deforestation, whether we're operating in a country that has a robust set of policies in that area or a country that lacks that robustness, we can continue to drive our program despite that. Obviously, it would be helpful. One of the things that's exciting about this forum for us is if we get more consistency in government's approach to sustainability. That will make it easier for a company like us to act. But a lack of that consistency cannot stop us from acting.
Okay. Let's see if we've got another comment or a question. To you, sir.
Thank you. My name is Mike Olson. I'm the president and CEO of OML Construction, and I'm here from Canada. And I guess one of the things I wanted to touch on is we've had, in the province we live in and the country we live in, we've had a significant change in policy and new governments coming in. And with that expression that John mentioned around we need to innovate in the absence of policy, one of the things that concerns me is that, for lack of a better term, it gets to be sexy for governments to knee-jerk change and create regulation that starts to stifle entrepreneurism. And I'm wondering if John Bryant, as a CFO, and how a CFO gets on stage at a climate conference is good for you, fantastic.
He's not a CFO anymore.
Oh, okay, sorry. Well, with that background, tax incentives for entrepreneurs seems to be something that governments would do well to embrace, and I guess for anybody on the panel and anyone that was here over the past week, is there anything that you're seeing to incentivize entrepreneurs to continue to innovate while policy churns along?
I'd like to start with you, Anders, on that question. How do you see wind energy being incentivized, including through fiscal policies or tax policies?
Yeah, so coming back a little bit, policies or no policy, I mean, and the comparison with mobile phones. I spent 25 years in the mobile industry, and I think it's a great example of a consumer drive. But we shouldn't forget that without the network, you can't use a mobile phone. So there were policies in place that harmonized the networks across the world, that agreed on standards, that pushed the cost down on the mobile networks. There was a great innovation, entrepreneurship in the handsets. There were great entrepreneurs like Google who made it useful to people, but there was an enormous cost out. As I said, I spent 25 years both on the infrastructure side and on the handset side. So it was a very nice combination between policies that set up the infrastructure and great entrepreneurship that drove costs down and therefore penetration to all countries. Mm-hmm. So I think maybe it's not the same, but I think there are similarities. I think you need, because it is a regulated environment, you need networks, and for networks you need then policies. At the same time, of course, you have to encourage innovation, entrepreneurs on how to use this ecosystem, how to make the ecosystem more efficient, how to drive down the cost in the whole ecosystem, how to come up with new ideas, how to make it more consumer-led. All of those, but I think it has to be a combination when we talk about big systems like energy generations across a global environment.
Okay, yes, John?
I'd like to just, if you look at entrepreneurs, I've done 2 startups. Each one took about 7 to 8 years of my life, and they were some of the most exciting things I've ever done. And entrepreneurs love to fix things that are broken. And what's great about this climate issue is it's really broken, and there's a lot of chaos that's going to happen in the next 20, 30 years. I've never seen more entrepreneurial opportunity because I'm convinced we're going to ultimately solve this issue in one way, shape, or form. Now, whether we have clear policy or ambiguous policy or vague policy, we're still going to move forward and solve this, which means we're going to turn over $20 to $40 trillion of infrastructure. We're going to have a lot of investment, a lot of opportunity, and a lot of big seams where entrepreneurs can develop and fix these things that are broken. If you took, search was not that great, but there were search engines out there. But that didn't mean that the guys at Google didn't say that, well, we already have search engines, right? They decided it wasn't good enough, let's create something better, and they've created a fairly interesting company. And that happens over and over again, and I think that entrepreneurship and technology is one of the greatest hopes for pushing forward. Hopefully, it's going to have a nice, firm, clear policy overlay.
Okay, I'm going to take a few more questions, if I have time. But then I'm going to come back to each of you and ask you all in a minute a question. And the question is going to be, when you go back home after Paris and you brief your colleagues on what has happened here, what are you going to tell them in terms of things they should be doing differently because of what has happened here? How are you going to tell them that Paris should be changing their perception of your business? So that's the question I'm going to ask you in a second. But first, someone else from the floor. Yes, you please, sir, the one standing up. Yes, you're the only one standing up.
So this is a tough question for John Brandt. I'm Phil Kidhill, CEO of AtMotion, a wave energy company based in New Mexico. Okay. So John, taking a bowl of cornflakes and thinking of the full carbon content. Agriculture is very carbon intensive, your packaging. What year will that be zero carbon impact? a bowl of cornflakes?
That's an easy one.
If ever.
Easy
Well,
question.
it's a great question. You know, what we've done is we've mapped out across our entire supply chain from the farm to the breakfast table what is the carbon impact of our various products. And as you expect, most of it comes back on the farm itself as well as within our plants. And so we have a series of initiatives to reduce that impact over time. We have a commitment later this week that we'll be talking about our goals long-term in this space. We don't have a path yet to get to zero, but we have a goal aligned with the 2 degrees Celsius goal to reduce that impact as much as we can. So it's very much work in progress for us, but we recognize that we are a major part of the solution to get there. And that's why we're engaging the entire end-to-end supply chain to make a meaningful difference in the impact on the environment.
Okay, thank you. I'll take one more.
Yes, I am.
Well, you've already got the microphone and you're already standing up, so how can I refuse? Go ahead.
Thank you very much. I'm Frank Sylvain. I'm CFO this time at Il Energy. You were talking about wind, about solar, and you forgot one thing, it's water. You know that 70% of our Earth is water, and this water is moving. It's as tidal current, oceanic current, river current, wave, etc. A lot of energy. And if we can capture just 10% of this energy, we will have enough energy for the whole world. I'm representing Energy, and I had no chance to speak here, and I just want to bring some hope, because our technology is mimicking nature. We are developing an undulating membrane, which is going to produce 10 times more energy than the turbine. We have been financed already by the Banque Publique of Investment in France. It's a French company. And just wanted to highlight that capturing this water energy on the world could be the solution. You have the wind, of course, but the beauty of this water movement, it is predictable. Because solar, when it's night, you have no energy. Wind, no wind. This tidal current, you know for the next 1,000 years when you're going to have the power, when it's going to be delivery, and the exact power you're going to have. So it was just to bring some hope and make some advertising for our little startup, because it's very, very hard, as you know, when you are a 3 years old company to be known. So thank you very much.
So that was the commercial break. Thank you very much. You know that one of the potential consequences of climate change is that the Gulf Stream stops functioning, so there will be no current. But let's hope that doesn't happen.
Yeah, but as the moon, is
you've
going
had your
over
chance.
Earth,
You've had your chance. There's a gentleman over there in the back, like me, without a tie.
Hamish Stewart at the National Observer. One question for John at Kellogg, John Bryant. Do you know if the Kellogg Staff Pension Fund has a climate policy, and are they going to align the Staff Pension Fund with 2-degree climate emissions budget? And then for the other John at Google, how do you find changes in subsidy regimes to fossil fuels? How will that affect entrepreneurialism and opportunity in the renewable energy sector?
Okay, very quick answer from both Johns.
So on the pension fund question, I have two roles. I'm the chairman and president of the Kellogg Company. I'm also one of the 4 trustees of the Kellogg Trust, which is one of the largest charities in the world. On the Kellogg Trust side, we are looking at how can you make investments that improve sustainability over time. Still very early days in that process. Some things have worked well, some things have not worked as well as we would like. We have not yet taken those lessons learned over to the Kellogg Company pension plan, but clearly for that trust work, we're still seeing how that evolves.
Okay, and the other John?
Yeah, so the question was around how we view the energy subsidies in our procurement, I believe. And as we look at, the subsidies were absolutely critical to bring the cost down over time. And they've done a great job. So I think that's allowed both wind and solar to get to a scale that's meaningful. And they become less important over time, but you've also got to remember there still are various subsidies on the other side of the equation with fossil. So eventually, we would think that bringing all of this, we're trying to address an externality, which is the price of carbon. And so bringing that in would be a much smarter way to manage the system than we think niche subsidies, but that's going to take time.
Okay, fantastic. Now that final question. Anders, what are you going to tell your colleagues when you go back from Paris?
Yeah, I mean, the Paris will not change our business model. So what I will tell them is the same as before. Wind is 4% of the total electricity generation today. It was 20% of new build last year. And it's competitive, clean, and water-free. And the better we are at lowering the cost, the more we can contribute to actually and be a solution to climate change. So our focus, driving costs down, be competitive to the fossil fuel alternatives, and therefore be part of a very big problem. You can't solve it with one technology, but you can make a very positive contribution.
So you're going to talk more to John. John, what's your answer?
Well, I come back to the way you opened this, with this being the 21st birthday. And, you know, Paris, what we decide, I think we have some idea of what's going to happen here. And it really is just like entering your adulthood. So this is the beginning of a process, not the end. And I think that, you know, I would be going back saying this is a start. There's a lot more to get done. And what we need is around the world, we need to keep moving forward on technology development. We need to keep investing to make sure these technologies get to scale that can matter and to start outcompete and keep driving the cost curve down. And I would say we've done a lot as Google and others, but we need to accelerate that pace even more, and we need to keep asking for more clarity and certainty so that we're not dealing with what was mentioned earlier, where laws stop and start and change. We want continuity.
Okay, Wang Ming?
Like many times of conference, Copenhagen, Durban, back home, I told my colleagues, never mind, never rely on policies, never mind the conclusion, the negotiation, the result of the conference. We will try our best to make every day solar, everybody living green. But this time is slightly different. I have a very deep impression that all this conference, our other conference, talking. These times, a lot of body are doing something, so like my colleagues here, and for us, that's a big encouragement. Another thing is that before this, we doing things mainly in China. Nowadays, I will be more aggressive. I will push every day living green, everybody living green, every day blue sky and solar everything into the whole world, into Paris, into France, into whole Europe.
Fantastic. Thank you. Saeed Al-Tayyab, what is going to be your message?
I think positive energy is a must, because we have many projects on hand, especially solar. We are going to just float 800 megawatt independent power plant. But actually, I would like to see more involvement of the private sector in this. This is very important. Also, I think last year we have the lowest PV price in the world, 5 cents per kilowatt, and we award a contract 200 megawatts. So we have many projects in the pipeline, and I am positive that we will continue with the solar project.
Fantastic. John?
So I think the size of the task ahead of us is daunting, but I'm optimistic about our ability to make progress. We'll come out of here and we'll have more government policies that will support the work we're trying to do. You have more companies standing up and making commitments. But I think the really powerful change that's happening is the consumer's voice is starting to be heard in this environment. And so consumers care. Now they have access to technology, whether it be mobile phones, social media, digital, etc., that enables the voice of the consumer to be heard loud and clear. And the voice of that consumer is going to drive companies and governments to make the changes to enable us to create a better environment for sustainability long term.
Okay. Unfortunately, This panel has been so fantastic that the rest of the day can only get worse. But still, let's not be pessimistic. I would like you to give a really, really warm round of applause to the fantastic panelists. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, just for the pursuit of this meeting, which will continue as strong as the first panel, despite what Ivo de Beer just told us, you will have a half-hour coffee break. Please just listen 2 seconds with me, and we will have 3 sessions in parallel. One here, which is going to be on the roadmap to our energy transition. One just over there in the Salle des Séances, l'Auditorium Mercure, mobilizing non-state actors for the post-COP21 agenda. And in the Salle des Séances, which is back there, the corporate response to decarbonizing economies. So please enjoy the continuation. Thank you very much.